All right, thank you to Bar Engineering, the good folks there, for providing that video and for helping to sponsor this fine event, as well as to our other sponsors as well. This next portion of the program is going to be a little bit interesting logistically. We're going to have three presenters to talk about some of the future opportunities in the lignite market. So we're going to have each of those three, they're going to do their little presentation, and then at the end of that, we're going to bring them back up on stage for Q&A. So as we go through this, I want you to be thinking of some questions. I can remember a trip to DC about 12 years ago. Lignite Council would always do these congressional visits. And a former member of our delegation spoke at an LEC fundraiser regarding Great River Energy's plans to construct the now completed Spiritwood station near Jamestown. He said, quote, "Very few power plants are being built these days, and the fact that one's being built in North Dakota is thanks to the positioning of the industry and the state through the Lignite Vision 21 program." You all remember LV 21? By doing your homework, the lignite industry has now positioned itself for growth. And indeed, that's true. Those words echo today when I think of the panelists and these topics that we're going to discuss. You know, we do have that 800-year supply of low-cost lignite, and it's going to continue to be a big part of North Dakota's future. So first up, we have the opportunity to hear from Jonathan Fortner, who recently joined the Lignite Energy Council as Director of Government Affairs. Jonathan's experience includes work with the Minnesota legislature. Today he's going to talk to us about the evolution to autonomous vehicles, self-driving vehicles, and what the future may hold for electric vehicles. Please welcome Jonathan Fortner.
Good morning. How's everybody doing this morning? Excellent. So I'm here this morning to talk about some emerging markets that could help the coal industry in the future. And I think I've got an interesting one that people might think is a little bit far out there, but it's a little bit closer than you may think. So as the lignite energy industry focuses on opportunities for growth, there's an interesting future market that could be found in the rise of autonomous vehicles that could greatly increase the amount of electric vehicles on the road. If and when this technology reaches a critical mass and becomes a large share of the cars on the road, it will be a big opportunity for the lignite industry and for the members sitting in this room that represent the Lignite Energy Council. So let's think for a moment about what a driverless vehicle would do to disrupt our way of life. An autonomous vehicle would be able to offer freedom and independence for people who cannot drive a car or provide access to someone who could give them a ride on a moment's notice. The very old, the very young, the disabled could now be self-reliant to make that trip across town. A few friends who spent some time at happy hour would have a safe ride to make their way home in their own vehicle to be with their loved ones. This technology could also change how commerce is done. No longer would only the very wealthy be able to afford a chauffeured vehicle. You could also order an autonomous vehicle to pick you up from work, to take you home, and have arranged for a meal to be waiting for you in the car when you get in. A student could spend some time studying for an upcoming test, or a businessman could find time to answer a stack of unread emails. The opportunities that autonomous vehicles could provide are too numerous to mention all of them today. The use of autonomous vehicles will be a reality within the near future, and it promises to bring major changes to our roadways across the nation and across North Dakota. Researchers believe that autonomous vehicles can operate without a driver, and they will hit the market by about 2025, and that technology could also be required in cars within the next 10 to 12 years. How many of you have flown from Hawaii to the mainland? These flights are often at night, and if you had the same level of trust that you do in your car as you do in your Delta Pilot, maybe you could leave your home in the evening, sleep in your car, only to awake at your destination in the morning. Suddenly, visiting your family in California or Arizona doesn't seem like the same dreaded marathon that you've experienced before, where you need some no-dose and a lot of caffeine and turn the radio up real loud. You know, it could be a more pleasurable experience. And you could even sleep, as your car drives yourself. Proponents of this technology, the main benefit they say is that it would decrease road fatalities nationwide, and then fewer accidents mean that there'd be less traffic congestion on the busy freeways across the country. Major automobile manufacturers are currently investing billions in autonomous vehicles in response to projections of a rise in global consumer demand, and they're also focusing on fleet services to provide a major player in the ride-sharing industry in the future. The use of autonomous vehicles for fleet sharing services could be beneficial to mobility services and would greatly reduce the need to invest billions of dollars in mass transit that we're seeing in a lot of the major cities across the country. However, before this technology becomes more widespread, there's a lot more research and development as well as policy making that needs to be done in order for the technology to be implemented and become ready for use on all the roadways. See if I can get my slide to work here. Okay, for the past 65 years, people have been dreaming of a future where they can ride in a car that drove itself. The picture I show here is from an issue of Popular Mechanics magazine from 1958, where they highlighted that an autonomous vehicle that steered itself on a 1-mile-long General Motors test site using an electronic guiding track was kind of the wave of the future. And the article highlighted that the idea men at General Motors, Ford, and Chrysler were hard at work developing an autonomous vehicle that would make travel more convenient and safe, and that the technology was not too far off from becoming a reality. Well, here we are in 2018, and we're still driving our own vehicles. And while the idea men from 1958 may have missed the mark a little bit on how soon the technology would be available, we've seen that today's technology has allowed major advancements where there are autonomous vehicles that have been built, and they're currently being tested on public roads in many states across the country. So let's talk a little bit about the current technology that's out there and a lot of the cars that are on the road. There's a lot of computerized components than there were in the vehicles of the past. Many are very similar to what autonomous vehicles will be using in the future. So if you have a car that was made after 2013, 2014, you likely have 60 to 100 computer sensors, while some of the higher end models may have around 200 in the vehicle. They consist of blind spot detection, GPS navigation, parking assistance, rear view cameras, to help you kind of back your car up, brake assistance, collision avoidance, and adaptive cruise control. And many of these sensors are kind of the basis for the technology that will allow a car to drive itself. Here's a picture that highlights how some of the technology will be used in a future car. And what you see there is there's some different pieces that are designed to detect objects nearby through a variety of components that see the road. The technology consists of LiDAR, which is a spinning laser that would make a 360-degree real-time map, you can kind of see in this picture, around a vehicle which is already available in some cars on the road today. I rode with a friend yesterday who had a rental car that actually had that on the dash, where it showed a picture of the vehicle and then the cars around it as he was pulling into a parking space. And it was pretty interesting how that worked. There's also infrared cameras that detect objects ahead of the car in either day or night vision, a visible light camera that predicts the movement of objects, advanced GPS navigation that uses mapping to tell the vehicle where to go, and also wheel-mounted sensors that measure the velocity relative to close objects around the vehicle to kind of read how fast and slow objects are moving. There are 6 levels of automation shown on this slide. Level 0 is what you see in current cars on the road, where you're in full control, you brake, you give it gas, you steer, you make all the decisions. That's a level 0 car. There's a level 1 and a level 2 that are kind of using some of the newer technology. There is a level 2 car currently on the road. It's the Tesla Model S, and there are some other models that are out there currently that has an autopilot feature. So it can steer, it can brake, and it can accelerate in freeway traffic. It uses radar, ultrasonic sensors, and a camera to figure out when to speed up, slow down, and maintain proper vehicle spacing. I've been in one of these cars. It's a little bit interesting. It's kind of, you have a cruise control that everyone's got currently in their car, and you just get out on the freeway and you're driving, you set the cruise, and you can watch the wheel kind of steer itself, and it will speed up, it'll slow down. It'll also shift lanes for you. Now, you need to have your hands near the wheel where you can kind of just jerk it and then the system will shut off, or touch the brake like your current cruise control. But it's really interesting. It's not ideal for using in city or towns on the roads. It's more of a freeway, which would be perfect for out in North Dakota. So, and I should also mention that the level 3, 4, and 5 are moving more towards fully autonomous. That means that the vehicle would have no steering wheel or no foot pedals, which makes me a little bit nervous. I mean, you'd like to have some kind of a backup if something goes wrong, but the idea is to get to level 5, which is a full automation where basically you get in, sit down, and the car does everything on its own. Some researchers predict that autonomous vehicles could be on the road within the next 10 years, but it's hard to predict how many there will be. Currently, there are many states that allow public road testing, such as Arizona, California, Nevada, and many others. And public road testing provides data for how the technology currently works, and then it also highlights areas for improvement. The first autonomous vehicles that will be on the road will likely be for ride-sharing purposes for companies like Uber and Lyft, who already operate under a similar business model. But there has been some recent things in the news that I'm sure you've heard about where there was a fatality in Arizona from one of the autonomous cars that Uber was testing. And the governor in Arizona that's very friendly to that industry and has kind of given them free rein to do their testing, he ended up suspending their test driving privileges after that happened. Now, the cause of the crash is currently under investigation, but it appears that the human driver was not paying attention and wasn't able to grab the wheel like he was supposed to. But it should be noted that in the future, you'll need more testing like this to make sure that there's a baseline to kind of compare against to show, hey, we're making progress. We've had some fatalities in the past, but the technology is getting better. So there's a lot of researchers and financial investors that believe that the auto industry will change more in the next 10 years than it has in the past 50. By 2015, there's been over $104 billion invested in R&D globally. For a comparison on how much that really is, the entire global aerospace and defense industry spent about $21 billion, which is about 20% of what the automakers are investing currently. So it's a lot of money. They are really betting heavy that this is what their future looks like. It should also be mentioned that Google has spent about $1 billion developing the technology as well to kind of provide the software backups for those automakers. And a lot of the current automakers are overhauling their manufacturing plants to mass produce more electric vehicles. Where you can see that General Motors, they think they're going to have 18 electric vehicles by 2023, and then Ford wants to have 24 electric or hybrid vehicles by 2022. But it's interesting that a lot of since they're shifting everything to producing electric vehicles, it could be assumed that a large percentage of the autonomous vehicles of the future, if they're making so many, I mean, we can pretty much guess that they're going to be electric powered as well. But however, the energy source that they decide, because a lot of the autonomous that are being tested now are powered by gas, so the technology isn't really there, battery life and those kind of options. It'll be kind of up to the consumers and the manufacturers to predict which source is better for them, but I'm predicting that it's going to be electric. There are a lot of benefits to autonomous vehicles. Increased road safety is one. The National Highway Traffic Administration said that about, there was 94% of the crashes are due to human error, and that costs society about $836 billion. So this is something that a lot of people at all levels of government are looking at that's something that can improve safety on the road, so they're very interested as well. And it would greatly reduce the societal cost of vehicle damage, hospital bills, other related expenses. It could also eliminate safety concerns such as distracted driving with smartphones and other interactions, impaired driving, like driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs, road rage, or any other medical condition. While there are many potential benefits, the industry is facing a lot of headwinds. One report claims that GM loses about $9,000 for every Chevy Bolt that they sell. So they have a lot that they need to work on to do economies of scale and figure out how to produce at a cheaper rate in order for consumers to be able to purchase these vehicles. And that would include, fixing battery prices and storage, building more efficient motors, maybe lighter cars, and then just the whole global supply chain needs to change for that price to come a lot further down. There are also a lot of obstacles that exist with this technology, and the biggest obstacle is consumer acceptance. I know myself, I would not feel comfortable, riding in one of these cars, but I'm waiting for the day when I look over and the car on the left and the car on the right, there's nobody driving. And that's, I don't know how I'm going to respond when that happens, but AAA did a recent survey of U.S. drivers and asked them how interested are they in having an autonomous vehicle as their next vehicle. And a majority of them said they'd be interested in doing it, but in another question, over 75% said that they greatly fear the idea of traveling in one of those cars. So it's kind of a weird, mix of, okay, I really like the idea, but I'm way too scared to even do it. So that's going to have to be overcome for this to be a main player on the road. There are also legal liability issues. Who's responsible if a driverless car that's coming to pick you up from work gets in an accident? I mean, is it the owner? You weren't there. You didn't do anything about it. Why'd that happen? There's also legislative policy as a concern, because there are 50 different states across the country that could all have different laws on how this is, allowed on the road. Reliability of the technology is a concern. I mean, computer hacking, or just plain old malfunctions. Cost is the concern, as I've already touched on. I mean, Tesla and other electric vehicles are pretty expensive right now, but then how expensive will it be to repair, maintain, or just to insure your driverless car? They also must be able to not hit your dog running across the street, people walking on the road, and then also current road infrastructure could change. 3M is a big player on this, where they are investing in all the striping that goes on the roads, the street signs. The technology in the autonomous vehicle needs to be able to read those, and so they're kind of looking at it as a big, investment opportunity for them to go out there and have to redo all the roads to have the markings be up to date. As I touched before on policy, there are currently 31 states that are moving towards legalization of autonomous vehicles. In North Dakota, there was legislation signed into law in 2015 directing North Dakota Department of Transportation to review the current laws dealing with licensing, registration, insurance, who owns the data, and inspection to determine how the laws need to be developed to apply to this new technology. We'll find more out about that next year, as the DOT is required to report those findings to the legislature. In Minnesota, it's interesting. North Dakota is ahead of Minnesota on this process, where they're kind of a year into it. Minnesota, just in March, the governor signed an executive order to put together kind of advisory council of both government and industry people to study, the opportunities and what it would mean to adopt this technology in Minnesota. And then it's interesting, I have a slide here in a second that shows that they have been testing an autonomous bus this winter. And I'd like to pull up two videos that show kind of what this bus looks like. So here it is being tested in front of the Minnesota Capitol. This was last month. I was down there, and they began testing this bus in 2017 at Min Road, which is a closed road that's a pavement research facility. And this is one of the first testing grounds in the country, or even the world, that shows how a bus or an autonomous vehicle would operate in a northern climate that includes snow and ice conditions with low temperatures and roads where salt is used. Typically, a lot of these buses have been tested down in Florida and warm weather climates where they don't have to do that. And what happens on a day like today? Can that bus or another autonomous vehicle, can they function on a North Dakota road? They just don't know it, so they're going through and doing a lot of the testing. This current bus that you see costs about $240,000. It's a prototype. It has four-wheel drive that allows it to better manage the winter conditions, and that bus was a highlight. They kind of showcased it at Super Bowl 52, where down on Nicollet Mall they provided rides for 1,300 people, and they didn't have any incidents. And then I should also mention that that bus is actually going to be at the North Dakota Department of Transportation Centennial Celebration, featured at the Transportation Expo next month. And then recently, you may have read in the Bismarck Tribune that city officials are working on a plan to add a driverless bus to the capital area transit fleet as part of a pilot program that they would test they would test the technology on the city streets for a few months next year. There's me with the bus. So, I'm guessing that many of you are thinking, Jonathan, this information is great, but what the heck does it have to do with the lignite industry? Well, I've got some good news to share on that. Since many of the large automakers are heavily investing in electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles are seemingly only a few years away, it is very likely that most of the autonomous vehicles in the future will be electric. And guess what? Electric vehicles need daily charging. And what power source are you familiar with that provides constant baseload power for 24 hours a day, 365 days out of the year? Wind, snow, rain, cold, hot, at an affordable price. Well, I'm sure you've guessed it, clean, beautiful, lignite coal. So with all of the promise that autonomous vehicles have for our future and for our industry, it's important that we consider what would happen over a short period of time if a large amount of consumers chose to purchase an autonomous vehicle that runs on electricity. Take, for example, that 2 electric vehicles would demand almost the same amount of power that it takes to power your home. Now, if every house on your block added an electric vehicle, it would almost double the amount of power that would be necessary to manage the load just on your block. Under that scenario, the power grid we have today could likely fail if a large population of people immediately made the switch to electric vehicles across the nation. This is clearly not going to happen in the near term, since technology and government policy are not quite a reality yet, but current trends that are being projected show a low to moderate uptake rate, and that could happen more when the vehicles are ready for prime time. One of the outlooks that are produced by Bloomberg New Energy Finance projects that this could happen on a broad scale across the U.S. by 2035. As consumer acceptance grows and more autonomous vehicles are purchased, so will the demand for utilities to provide baseload power to charge the vehicles. Industry analysts predict that real impact to the grid will occur when autonomous vehicles number around 15% of the cars on the road. It will be important to pay attention to where the early adopters of this technology are located in order to learn what the new trend would mean for the industry. And while North Dakotans may not be quick to adopt this technology due to our harsh weather events or concerns over battery range, smaller pockets may occur in cities like San Francisco, New York City, or even Minneapolis. Those cities would likely be good test areas to see how the power grid, transmission lines, and transformers are able to handle the increased demand. Our industry needs to be able to guarantee that we can provide a sufficient amount of energy and that the capacity is available on demand. We already know that the current peak demand for baseload power coming from lignite is during the hottest days in the summer and the coldest days in the winter. We also know that the peak driving period of the year is in the summer, when families take road trips to visit national parks and see their extended family across long distances. And if we're adding autonomous vehicles that run on electricity during high peaks of demand, we'll also be adding a lot more baseload power, which could mean more tons of lignite mined and energy produced by our members. The increase in the baseload power due to autonomous vehicles would also make our power plants more efficient. It would reduce the need for power plants to cycle energy generation because autonomous vehicle charging would mostly happen at night. So energy demand would even out over a 24-hour period. With more demand and less variation, the generation of electricity could come much cheaper and fixed costs are spread more evenly. And to get a better idea of how that would work, think of the grid as a bus. Each bus ticket is cheaper if the bus is always full of passengers, rather than building a bus to hold 50 passengers that maybe only is full a couple times a day. A more uniform load would also lead our utilities to invest to reinforce the grid with transformers and wires, which helps them distribute power. And currently, I've been researching to try and find more data out there. There's not much good research on what the power demand would look like, but I think it's, from the presentation I put forward here, it's pretty easy to kind of have a picture of in the future that this could be an issue, but a positive opportunity for this industry. And I think that's something that could be a future research study for the Lignite Research Council. So to wrap up, autonomous vehicles will increase baseload demand in the not too distant future, which is good for our members and should lead to the increase in lignite production and electricity output. While the technology has a few more significant steps to go through, all signs point to it becoming a reality sooner than later, and members of the Lignite Energy Council will be active in this disruptive technology because it's a major opportunity for us to add load growth, which will help maintain our industry in the region and continue to help provide high-paying jobs for many generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Jonathan. Sort of thought-provoking to think what the future might hold. I've got a few of those sensors in the car. I lease a 2017 Camry, and some of those things are pretty doggone cool. I've got these blind spot detection things in my mirrors all the time. So if I'm going up and down 7th and 9th and that little orange light is on, it just says, don't change lanes right now. And if I get stuck in one of those, two-way traffic kinds of things on the interstate, it will actually match the speed of the vehicle in front of me. It just stays a certain distance behind constantly. It's pretty doggone cool. The one thing that kind of annoys me about it, though, if I'm like overtaking a vehicle too fast, it goes beep, 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 step on the brakes. And I'm like, don't tell me how to drive, god dang car. Well, anyway, that was a fascinating kind of thought-provoking thing. Our next topic, you think about a power plant now. Power plant, we know, produces carbon dioxide. That's emitted from the stack. And there's always a little bit of waste heat there. Now, imagine if you put a greenhouse next door. From Great River Energy, here to describe that for us is Rich Garman. So, Rich, please kind of fill us in on what the opportunities might be there, would you?
Thanks, Jeff. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you for not using the Garmin GPS joke that you promised me you'd use. Spelled very differently, not a real name. I'm here to talk to you today for a few minutes about a project that we've been working on with our partners next door at North American Coal, Falkirk Mine, for approximately a year and a half. Approximately a year and a half ago, some of the folks from Falkirk came over and were asking, is there any way we could harness the heat that's in the cooling tower basins to more effectively use the BTUs that are being produced by burning the coal at Coal Creek Station. We started down the path of looking at different options for greenhouses, and one of the things we learned right away, or fairly quickly, was that we were coal miners and power plant operators, not greenhouse operators. We did a lot of due diligence. We went to a few different locations. We traveled over to Minnesota, saw a tree greenhouse. Traveled down to Utah, saw another greenhouse attached to a power plant. The more we learned, the more we knew we needed some expertise to back us up. We're reasonably good at mining coal and reasonably good at making electricity and heat, but we decided real quickly that we weren't greenhouse operators and we needed to find somebody that was. So, what this project is basically about is we want to develop some engineering studies that prove that Coal Creek Energy Park is a viable location for a commercial greenhouse. We don't want to build a greenhouse. We want to prove to somebody else that it would be viable for them to come up to Coal Creek and build a greenhouse attached to our facility. Like I said a second ago, we want to utilize the excess heat from the Coal Creek station to provide heat for a commercial greenhouse. There's a lot of excess heat in the cooling tower basin. Some of our engineers have done some calculations, and it's a wild amount of heat that's available in that cooling tower basin. The problem is it's a very low grade heat. It's about 110, 115 degrees Fahrenheit, the water going out to the basin. That's not extremely useful in a power plant setting. So as we moved around looking at different facilities, we happened upon a facility down in Utah. It's called the Howlings Group. The Howlings Group has a few facilities around the country. Their main facility and their original facility is in Vancouver, British Columbia, where it's a 50-acre facility under glass in Vancouver, British Columbia, where their primary crop is tomatoes. They then built another facility in Central California, 125 acres, which was a bit surprising to me, is why would you need a greenhouse in Central California? Isn't the weather always perfect in Central California? The answer is no, it's not. In a greenhouse, the weather is always perfect. It's always 77 degrees and the humidity is perfect. More recently, the Howlings Group put together a facility in central Utah, in Mona, Utah, just south of Salt Lake City. In that location, they built a 28-acre greenhouse under glass. This one really caught our eye, and I'll share with you why here in the next few screens. This is probably a drone photo of the facility that's in Mona. It's 28 acres under glass, and it was commissioned in 2015. It provides year-round locally grown tomatoes for Utah, Colorado, Nevada, northern Arizona, an entire trade region there. It employs 120 employees. It uses supplemental lighting to allow for the plant growth overnight. It produces 457,000 bushels of tomatoes per year. I tried to compare that to corn or soybeans, and it's mind-boggling how many tomatoes are produced in a year from a facility in only 28 acres. Now, what makes this facility more unique than other greenhouses we observed was the fact that they actually use the flue gas from the Current Creek power plant, and they divert that into the Howlings greenhouse via an above-ground duct, which is visible in the photograph here. The thermal energy is stored for the greenhouse heating and on demand. So they take some of the heat and they store it in large water tanks. And CO2 is actually directed directly from the flue gas into the greenhouse. Condensate is also captured out of the flue gas and then utilized as a water source for the plants. The Howlings Group is very unique in the fact that they have actually attached a greenhouse to a power plant. And I want to take a quick second here on this next video, or this next slide. It's actually a video on this one. This is a promotional video from Rocky Mountain Power, which is the local utility that they actually tied into. The power plant they tied into, Current Creek Power Plant, is owned and operated by Rocky Mountain Power. It's produced by them, so there'll be a little bit of advertising in there as well. But it shows how the plant is connected to the power plant. We'll run that video here real quick. It's about a minute long.
To do something that's never been done, you have to think big. That's what Howlings Tomatoes and Rocky Mountain Power did when they tapped into waste heat and carbon dioxide from a power plant to grow tomatoes. Working together, the big idea grew.
Rocky Mountain Power, through its WattSmart program, helped us achieve some of the energy goals that we had when we started this site. We got some $950,000 to help increase our efficiency of electrical use and reduce our consumption. It also saves us some $500,000 in power. They have a power plant now that is actually utilizing its waste to grow tomatoes to feed people in Utah.
This is one big idea that's not only saving money, it's also doing the right thing for future generations.
The gentleman in that video's name is Casey Howlings. He's the second generation owner of the greenhouses that we've been talking about. And he was actually in town in the last few days working on this project with us. We're moving forward with a few different studies with Mr. Howlings on studying the viability of building a greenhouse in North Dakota attached to a power plant. Some of the work being done right now, there's a two-part study being done right now. Mr. Howlings is running the part of the project where he is doing the study on what it will take to build the greenhouse itself. It'll be a mirror image of the one in Utah. There's a lot of unique items that he has to take into account for this facility in North Dakota. There's less light availability in North Dakota. The winters are colder in North Dakota than Utah. The fact that he will be using warm water rather than warm flue gas as his heating medium changes things a little bit too. All of those things taken into account, though, it is looking reasonably positive, and we're still in the middle of the study phase. The other part of the study phase is on the Great River Energy side of the fence. What we're studying is what it will take to put infrastructure in place so that he can build the facility. We won't be building a facility. Great River Energy isn't interested in building the facility. We're interested in providing a portion of our energy park, Coal Creek Energy Park, so that a tenant like Mr. Howlings can come to town and build a facility right next to our power plant. Our studies include determining size of pipes, cost of pipes to deliver warm water, etc. All of the utilities he would need, logistics infrastructure, whatever else would be needed to build that facility. We expect that study to continue on for another 60 to 90 days between the Howlings group and us. At that point, we hope to come to a go, no-go situation where he will evaluate all of the costs involved and then do his business evaluation, his business case evaluation, and determine whether or not he can cost effectively build another facility like the one he has in Utah in Underwood, North Dakota. So the question comes up, we've been asking ourselves all the way through, can heat energy from a power plant be utilized as a primary heat source in a commercial greenhouse? Mr. Howlings has proven yes, it can, and actually several others have proven yes, it can be used. Can CO2 from an ethanol source or an industrial source such as a power plant be used to enhance plant growth? The answer again is yes, of course, it can be used. We'll talk in a second here. We have actually a few other studies going on with NDSU and EERC. I'll tell you about those in a second. The big question on the table, though, is can this facility be built and operated economically at the Coal Creek Energy Park? That's what the basis of the studies are. So what's the Coal Creek Energy Park? The Coal Creek Energy Park, this is a satellite view, obviously, of the Coal Creek Station and surrounding areas, with the black lines to the west there indicating where a greenhouse layout would be placed, just to the west of the facilities. The items that are available at the Energy Park, obviously, are heat from several sources. The main source in this situation is from warm circulating water from the cooling towers. There's power available. Logistics are already in place via road and rail access. There's CO2 available from two different sources, from the ethanol plant and from the flue gas. There's land available between Great River Energy and the Falkirk mine. There's several sections of land available that we can develop. And there's water availability. We're already moving a significant amount of water from the river up to our site. I want to talk a little bit about some of the grant work that's happened as well. This project, like I said, has been going for about a year and a half. We've been studying it, and we've really focused heavily on the greenhouse part of it in the last 6 months. But the LRC has actually granted a bit of money as well to do some other studies that are in conjunction with this greenhouse project. Part of our study is with EERC. They are taking a look at the flue gas at Coal Creek Station and trying to understand what that flue gas would have to undergo, what process that flue gas would have to undergo to be able to be utilized within a greenhouse situation, much like the facility they have down in Utah. The difference in the Utah facility is that's a gas-fired power plant. We're a coal-fired power plant. There's quite a bit of difference in the flue gas. They're studying that. The other part that EERC is studying is once we isolate that CO2, what delivery mechanism would be the most effective to deliver it to plants. Second part of the study right now going on is NDSU. They're doing field applications of CO2 and then greenhouse applications of CO2 as well. They're studying how to apply it and what happens when they apply it. What's the plant response when they apply this CO2? More recently, we were awarded a grant from APUC. APUC gave us a grant, Agricultural Products Utilization Committee. Did I get it right, Rachel? I hope so. They evaluate the viability of locating a commercial greenhouse. They're helping us evaluate the locating of the commercial greenhouse at Great River, or next to Great River Energy. That money is being spent right now in the studies that I've described earlier. That amount of that grant was $75,000. So for now, that's where we have. We're looking at the possibility of utilizing some waste heat, truly waste heat from the cooling tower basins at Coal Creek Station. We're 2/3 to 3/4 of the way through that project and hope to have some good answers in the very near future on what we'll be doing. Will we be progressing? On timeline, if the project is a go or a no-go, indications from Mr. Howlings is it's 1.5 to 2 years out before we would commit to building something there, or before he would commit to building something there. But the reality is, there's a real potential of being able to utilize that waste heat. I will turn it back to Jeff.
Thanks very much for that, Rich. Fascinating opportunity, and we're going to know in the next year or two here, so great. So keep in mind, we're going to have a panel discussion after this. That's why we got the 3 chairs up on stage. So we're going to get these guys back up here right after this next presentation. Mike Holmes briefly mentioned this yesterday when he talked a little bit about some of the R&D that's going on. Rare earth minerals are a real opportunity in North Dakota. Here to tell us about that is Mr. Ned Kruger with the North Dakota Geological Survey. So would you all please welcome Ned to the stage?
Well, good morning, everybody. I'd like to start by thanking the Lignite Energy Council for inviting me here today to speak with you about rare earth elements. I'll talk to you a little bit about what they are, how they're used, where they're found, where they're produced, their assessment as a critical mineral, and how they're associated with lignite coals. The rare earths include 16 elements that are capable of imparting powerful properties of strength, magnetism, and luminescence, just to name a few, upon the products manufactured by them. The rare earths have widespread use in modern advanced technology projects, and they're not that rare. They're actually found in small quantities in most environments, but it's a much more rare occurrence for them to be found concentrated into a mineable ore. And some people would say that they're rarely produced due to production costs. The images here are some of the first that come to mind when we think of rare earths. You have like the Navy F-35, they're used in lightweight aerospace and military applications, computers, wind turbine generators, medical imaging instruments like CAT scans and MRIs. If you've got a phone buzzing in your pocket today, it's the magnets made from rare earths that are making that happen. And they're also highly utilized in electronic and hybrid vehicles. In fact, in a hybrid vehicle, they have a lot of applications. They're used in the motors and the generators, batteries, other various electronic motors located throughout the vehicle. They're used for glass and mirror polishing, catalytic converters, and even the LCD screens that are inside the passenger compartments. A typical hybrid vehicle will have 2 to 3 pounds of rare earths in the magnets of its motor, and another 20 to 30 pounds in its batteries. And they're really used for so much more, whether it be catalysts for petroleum refining, the manufacture of solar panels, superconductors, nuclear control rods, laser crystals, phosphors, pigments. You can get the idea. They have a lot of applications. Now, somewhere in the audience today, I'm pretty sure there's someone who is thinking that they would like to see where this would fall in a periodic table of elements. You know who you are. I won't ask you to raise your hand, but we can do that. The rare earth elements are located near the bottom of the table, where known as the lanthanides. They're shown here on this slide outlined in red with an arrow indicating the proper position where they would take in the third column of the table. I've also highlighted two elements overlying this position in the third column, and that's because scandium and yttrium are also considered along with the lanthanides in discussions of rare earth elements because they share similar chemical and physical properties. You'll notice I also X'd out one of the elements. That's the element promethium, and I X'd that out because it's one that's not really considered. It's a very unstable element, and actually is the one truly rare earth as far as natural occurrences are concerned. From the 1960s to the 1980s, the United States was the largest producer of rare earths thanks to the Mountain Pass mine in the Mojave Desert in California. There they mined an igneous carbonatite deposit, which is considered a traditional ore of rare earths. But you can see from the graph here that in the 1980s, China entered the equation, and due to the cheaper labor and blacks' environmental regulations, China quickly influenced the industry and gained larger and larger share market, eventually resulting in the closure of the Mountain Pass mine in 2002. So this is a good point to get into the topic of mineral criticality. As defined by the National Academy of Science, a critical mineral is a mineral which performs an essential function for which few substitutes exist, and for which an assessment indicates a high probability of supply being disrupted, resulting in a physical unavailability or a significantly higher price for that mineral. These disruptions can be physical in nature, such as natural disasters. They could be political in nature, in the case of wars and conflicts. Rare earths certainly fit into this definition and are considered critical minerals, and actually a critical mineral in which we are currently 100% import reliant upon. The following three slides show an interesting case of how markets for minerals evolve, using the computer chip technology as an example. In the 1980s, computer chips were composed of essentially 12 elements that were used in their production, and they're highlighted on this slide in blue. In the 1990s, 4 elements were added to the production of computer chips, shown here in green. And then in the 2000s, 45 new elements, including rare earths, have been brought into the production of computer chips. So you can see how innovation is really creating new markets for new minerals. Now, the situation the United States finds itself in regard to critical minerals was forewarned at least as far back in 1973 in a USGS report on non-fuel minerals, which noted that 1, U.S. mineral production self-sufficiency has declined. 2, the relative importance of the U.S. as a supplier has declined. And 3, that the U.S. faces increasing competition for the world's mineral resources. And this goes forward today, where we as a country find ourselves 100% reliant on rare earth elements. Here I have a listing of the rare earth elements and several ways they can be categorized. The first of which I will discuss is being classified by weight class. Depending on who you look at, various authors choose different cutoffs for what they consider light rare earths and heavy rare earths. But the general truth is this: the elements found in most traditional rare earth ores generally tend to be composed of greater amounts of the light rare earths than the heavy. So you have a certain abundance of the lighter rare earths, which becomes a factor in the economic classification, which is driven by supply and demand. China currently produces about 85% of all rare earths and effectively produces 100% of the more valuable heavy rare earths. And some of they're actually mining them from weathered clay deposits. And these deposits may only last them another 10 to 15 years. So this is not exactly an ideal situation to be so reliant on one nation for mineral commodities with such unique and essential properties as the rare earths possess. And it becomes important to find additional sources domestically, or short of that, additional sources throughout the world, which can lessen the risk of supply disruption. So several years ago, a number of reports were published looking at coal as an alternative source of rare earth elements, with the understanding that the rare earths were being unintentionally produced at coal mines and ultimately treated as a waste product in the post-combustion fly ash. So the question was raised, could fly ash become a secondary resource with rare earth concentrations becoming more concentrated through the combustion process? At the North Dakota Geologic Survey, we decided it was time to get some more ground data on the potential as it related to North Dakota lignite. We began this effort by targeting coals where they outcrop at the surface in the Badlands of western North Dakota. This was initially a cost-saving measure as opposed to the cost that would be incurred through a drilling program. It was much easier just to be able to walk right up to the outcrop and grab the sample. So in 2015, we obtained a permit from the state trust lands, later followed by a permit through from the U.S. Forest Service in order to access national grasslands for the purpose of acquiring coal samples at 6-inch intervals throughout the thickness of the coal beds. We were able to walk right up to the coal beds, dig a half to a foot back into the coal in order to collect a sample that were less exposed to surface conditions, and then fill the holes with minimal surface disturbance. This program continued from 2015 through 2017 and culminated in a report that was made available in December of last year, entitled Rare Earth Element Concentrations in Fort Union and Hell Creek Strata in western North Dakota. This map shows the locations of 65 sites in Billings, Slope, McKenzie, Golden Valley, and Bowman counties where 479 samples were collected, 352 of which were ultimately submitted for analysis. On this figure, you can see the stratigraphic intervals where the coals and carbonaceous mudstones from the 65 sites that were sampled. The thicknesses of the black bars represent the relative thickness of the measured sections at each location, which were described and sampled. We were able to, through the measured sections, to cover most of the stratigraphic extent of the Fort Union group, depicted here on this slide with the tan colors. We sampled all coal beds encountered, whether they're nice thick exposures like this one here along the bank of the Little Missouri River in Billings County, or thinner beds. This one just about a foot thick with a clay parting separating the two. Or even thinner beds like this one, which was only about 2 to 3 inches thick. We also sampled, drew distinctions of the type of coal that we were encountering, whether it would be a hard coal or a soft coal or a powdery coal or a weathered coal. This is a photo of a weathered coal, and one of the things we found, or I'm sorry, of a powdery coal. And one of the things we found was the really fine-grained powdery coals seem to have, on balance, a higher concentration of rare earths, and also seem to often have a higher proportion of the more valuable heavy elements within them. You look at this photo and you might not even see any coal back down where the two people are sampling, and that's because we also took a look at carbonaceous clays and muds, particularly when they occurred at the top of buttes. We're kind of thinking that if there's any leaching going on, we wanted to see whether those carbonaceous clays and muds were also essentially trapping rare earths, or short of that, were they a barrier to those rare earths getting lower into the butte and preventing them from accumulating in coals that might be below. We also looked at uraniferous lignites, uranium and other minerals that have leached out of tufaceous rocks from the Rickery, Brule, and Shadron formations, and they've been deposited in underlying sands and coals in the Fort Union group. The idea here is if you're having these accumulations of uranium, then perhaps the same processes may be linked to higher concentrations of rare earths as well. I'm sure many of you in the room here today know Ed Murphy. This is a photograph of Ed Murphy up on top of a butte. This was in a location where we were expecting to encounter higher concentrations, radioactive concentrations, and you can maybe barely make out that Ed's wearing a dust mask in this photo, just because we were a little worried about the potential for higher radioactivity. And here we have one of our geologists who's actually checking the radioactivity levels in a sand deposit at a site that was near an old uranium mine. Here we have a site in northern Slope County where there's at the top, right at the surface, you can see there's about a 10-foot thick terrace gravel deposit that's immediately overlying about 2 feet of clay, and then right below that clay is a very thick system of coal. And again, there we were interested to find, since the terrace gravels had volcanic source rocks in them, we were interested to see if the product of leaching through those gravels could lead to higher rare earth concentrations in the coal just below it. And indeed, we did find elevated concentrations in that coal. For all 65 of the sites that we sampled, we did measured sections, and in our report we have illustrations such as the one on your screen here, where we show where our sample locations are in the coal and give the results of analysis and also a description of the type of coal that we are sampling, or type of material, since we did also sample carbonaceous mudstones and clays. From this same location, we did have a series. We actually went back after we got our first results back from there, where we had a very high sample return of 493 parts per million. We resampled it just to make sure that it wasn't a bad analysis, and the resample came back even higher, 555 parts per million. So it looked like a good site, and we did collect a couple other areas nearby, just to see, just to get a quick look at the lateral extent of the deposits. And you know, and based on that, from our initial findings, we were seeing that it fluctuates a little bit. So we essentially, this was phase one, so we didn't have a lot of lateral extent in this report. We've since done a phase two sampling, where we are looking at where we do have increased concentrations. We're looking at the lateral extents and trying to determine how extensive they are, how far out we can find elevated concentrations. This is a photograph of the site where we actually encountered our highest concentration. It was from the coal at the very base of this exposure. The coal itself was only about a foot and a half thick, but you could see we really got some pretty high numbers on that one, over 603 parts per million. So right now we believe that's the highest analysis that we've seen in the state of North Dakota. And just to put that in a little bit of perspective, the Department of Energy is currently funding research, and they're looking at a threshold of 300 parts per million as the sources that they're interested in studying further. So here, this site doubles that. And you can see the thicker coals above it, we have some elevated concentrations as well, and you can kind of see a general pattern that emerged. Typically, we were finding the highest concentrations either at the tops, near the tops, or near the bottoms of coal seams. And this is just a photograph of that 603, the coal where that 603 parts per million sample was taken. See, it's about 15 inches thick in this locality. And we did trace it out a little bit further, took another sample 125 feet from the original location. Did notice some variation. It was becoming, had more clastics in it, just 120 feet away. The deposit was thicker, but yeah, it was also becoming, had more mud and more clay minerals within it as well. In addition to coal, we were also interested in sampling a few other things. One of the things we looked at was trying to sample ash from a burned coal deposit below clinker deposits, with the thought being, if you're looking at a already burned coal, maybe if you're in a scoria pit or something like that, when you're done mining the clinker, you can go in at that point and also try to remove ash, which will already have these concentrated levels of rare earths. We did have difficulty with that. This was one site where we've actually found a fairly nice ash layer to sample, but in general, when we are looking for those contacts, the systems were just kind of jumbled, and it really was hard to get a clean ash sample. And typically, when you did find an area, there would be at nearly vertical cliffs 80 feet up and just impossible to sample. So we had some difficulty with that. We also looked at the potential of tonsteins. Tonsteins are essentially volcanic ash deposits which become altered to clay that you can find within coal seams. The difficulty there is determining, is it really a tonstein or is it just a clay parting? But we've collected a few samples there, some of which we believe are tonsteins, and it's through the chemical analysis that we are able to determine whether it's just a clay parting or a tonstein. So some of the results of our findings in our report, as I said, we did kind of classify different the samples we took based on what type of coal it was, or if it was a coal or carbonaceous clay or mudstone. And we just presented some of our findings as far as what the range of concentrations we found within each type of material, and what the averages were for those, the average for each of these types of materials. We also looked at it going back to the economic classes of materials. We looked at it based on how many of the critical elements, the more valuable elements we're finding, as opposed to those which are non-critical or even currently mined to an excessive amount. And that was one of the good things we find with the North Dakota lignites, is we are finding relatively good proportions of your more critical elements, shown here in the darkest shades of green. You can see roughly half of the rare earth, of the breakdown of the rare earths, almost half of them are those heavier, more valuable rare earths. And how that can come into play, if you compare the composition of rare earths in North Dakota lignite, here it's in the center of this slide, and comparing it on the left to the Ore Mountain Pass, California, where you can see that was primarily producing light, excessive and non-critical minerals, and that really played into the economics of Mountain Pass not being able to continue as a mine. And then if you compare it also to the lateritic clays that are the primary source of the heavy minerals, heavy rare earth elements being mined in southern China. Not quite as favorable as that, but certainly it is better than most of your more traditional rare earth ores. So some of the conclusions of our report, we did find of the 277 lignite samples that were collected, we did find an average of 128 parts per million in those samples. 14 of our samples exceeded the 300 parts per million threshold that the Department of Energy is looking at. The average concentration of 21 samples identified as powder coal was 207 parts per million. And again, I point out that those also tended to be a little bit more enriched in the more valuable heavier elements. Initially, that 603 part per million sample that we took was actually underneath a sandstone, and that was the first sample that we took that was underneath a sandstone. So immediately we thought we need to find some more coals overlain by sandstone to see if this is what it ties in, can really be linked to that. And while we did find that there appeared to be some association of that, it didn't turn out to be necessarily, it wasn't the defining characteristic. It appears that maybe that it has some influence. In our phase 2 study, we're still coming up with kind of mixed results on that, but we are seeing a little bit more frequency of higher concentrations when it's overlain by a sand. And again, the ratios of critical to excessive elements in the North Dakota lignites compared favorably to those found in Mountain Pass in California. And another thing, we did a comparison to the USGS coal qual database. We found over 5,500 complete analyses for rare earths within their database. And we compared our sample results to those. We found that 7 of our samples from this report, if added to this database, would be in the top 20 for total concentrations of rare earths. So that was kind of exciting, although I don't want to overbill that because, of course, we were specifically targeting areas where we thought we'd be enriched in rare earths. It's hard to say of those 5,500 samples how many others were specifically taken looking for rare earths, or if they were just kind of getting a general composition of the entire bed of a coal. So the main takeaway I'd like to leave you with today is that we have demonstrated that there are locations in North Dakota where our lignites have been shown to have relatively high concentrations of rare earths. And these locations often include a more favorable proportion of the more valuable heavy rare earths. We're now, as I said, we're examining now in more of a phase 2 project the extent. Once we find a locality that has high concentrations, we're trying to determine what the extent, what the variability as we move out, how persistent these areas are. And we do expect this to be challenging. We're finding a lot of variability in the field. It may be challenging to find a site that really has a large lateral extent, but it's a possibility. Ultimately, I think this the potential for lignite to become a player in rare earths, it's probably going to be driven through innovation. And currently there are teams looking into this with including the EERC and the Institute for Energy Studies in UND. We've been working with these groups, trying to help them in their research, and it's kind of been a very interesting process. And from a scientific and engineering point of view, it really is an exciting new challenge. and it could represent a potential future growth opportunity for the lignite industry in North Dakota. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Stay right there, grab a chair. All right. You guys, come on up. Come on up. I told you we're going to have a little Q&A session here. First off, while these guys are coming up, I'm just curious, and I want you all to be honest. By a show of hands, who would be willing to buy, purchase, or ride in an autonomous vehicle, a driverless vehicle? Who's brave enough to try that? All right. Yeah, we got some courageous folks out there. Okay. All right, so get your questions ready. We got some microphones floating around the audience. I'm going to throw one at Ned real quick here. I get an idea what rare earth minerals, it would be a typical surface mining operation probably. What's the processing look like? Do you know? Can you help? Can you help us out with that?
Well, that's kind of to be determined right now, and that's what some of the teams at UND are looking at, is how you would process the rare earths out of the ore, and then beyond that, you're looking at just making a concentrate, which would go to another facility most likely, in which you'd separate the rare earths. So yeah, there would probably be, essentially you're going to need those facilities, so yeah, you'd probably be looking, certainly if you can apply it to an existing coal mine where you're already removing the overburden and you already have the reclamation, that's where the economics come in and to make it more likely so that you'd have to add these additional facilities nearby then.
So we're essentially concentrating the ore, so to speak, here, and then it'd go somewhere else maybe?
Potentially,
like
yeah.
Hey, I think we have a question right out here.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, this is for Ned also, actually. 3 parts to this question. First of all, you had mentioned that the sampling is going on of the coal combustion byproducts of the power plants, fly ash, bottom ash, rejects. Do you know any of the results of that as far as possibilities?
Are you asking about the concentrations? Well, we have in the fly ash, we do have, not for all of our analyses, but we do have over 300, I think now, well, maybe not that many, 200 analyses, both on a whole coal basis, which is an important point, and I'm glad you asked that. Everything I presented in my talk was on a whole coal basis. If you're looking post-combustion, really you're interested in the ash concentration, the ash basis. And yeah, there's a lot of variability with that. Generally, if you have a high whole coal number, you're gonna still probably get a high ash basis as well. In one example, I can tell you that 603 part per million sample, looking at on an ash basis, it's over 2,000 parts per million that way. So it really does look like an attractive target to see that we do have lignites in North Dakota that have that concentration. And it really depends on the coal quality. You noticed on the one graph I showed, the middle of the coal, the numbers go down on a whole coal basis. Well, if that is partly because the quality of the coal is getting better, you're going to produce less ash from that. So what might only be 100 ppm whole coal base result may go up to 1,000 ppm on an ash base, just because there's so few impurities that there just doesn't produce much ash. So that's something that needs to be looked at as well. And we'll be putting out a little bit more on that as well.
Yeah, I think most of the folks here would be very interested in that as those results are produced. Another part of my question then is, I think the U.S. is, because we're almost wholly dependent upon China on these, is the U.S. making this a strategic priority? Is there any sort of subsidies you see coming down the way to maybe, because of the strategic position we're in vis-a-vis China, that they would subsidize it? And then another question, are we stockpiling rare earths?
Yes, I would say yes is the answer to both of those. Rare earths are being stockpiled. To an extent, certainly right at the end of last year, about the same time our report, actually I think maybe the same day our report came out, the USGS released a report of their own saying that, highlighting the fact that there are, I believe it was 23 minerals, critical minerals that the United States was 100% import reliant upon, and essentially drawing attention to that and showing that we need to get away from that for some of these critical minerals. So yeah, I think there is some opportunity for that. Certainly right now the DOE is funding research into them. So that's really where the money is going right now, I think, is looking to research the potential for rare earths. I'm sorry I can't look at you. I get light in my eye. I don't even know where this question is coming from. But okay. All right, thank you.
Steve's got one more over here, and then we'll get you over here, Dave. Go ahead, right over there.
Sure. This question's for Rich. What rough size is that tomato facility looking like, maybe in comparison to how many are sold in North Dakota?
What is the size of the facility that's being looked at? Was that the question?
Versus the North Dakota market as well, I think.
Oh, thank you. Far more than North Dakota could ever consume. I don't have the exact numbers, but the markets would be, and this is not my information, this is information that Mr. Howling shared with me. The markets would have to be considerably larger, Minneapolis, possibly to Chicago, Omaha, Winnipeg. It would be a upper Midwest regional market. So,
I was trying to imagine what 457,000 bushels of tomatoes would look like. It's a lot of ketchup, I tell you that. Yeah. Okay, question over here, somewhere.
Is this working? Yeah. Yeah, Mike Cashin. I have a question about the rare earth information. Could you put that 300 part per million concentration in context a little bit for us? You know, those of us that are engineers would say, okay, DOE is interested if you're above the 300 concentration. It's a site with prospects. How high would you find minerals, say in China or some of the other places that are currently serving market, to contrast with that? And where are you well in the range that you would like to be for cost-effective recoveries?
Yeah, I can address at least a portion of that. I guess I'm not a mine engineer, so I don't have the ability to make some of these projections, but I can tell you that the clays in China that are mined for the heavier rare earths, they're actually very similar in concentration to lignite coals. You're looking at hundreds of parts per million in those deposits. Your more traditional rare earth deposits, the hard rock deposits that have been mined traditionally, those are significantly higher. But again, you have some difficulties of their own where it's harder to extract from hard rock. Typically, you're going to see higher, while you might have higher concentrations, you're also going to be a lot more, the proportion of the light, less valuables are going to be a lot higher. So there's some trade-offs there that you would look at. I guess, does that answer your question, or was there? Yeah.
Sure. Okay. We have any others out there?
I have one for the guy in the middle, Jonathan. We don't want him to go home and feel like, oh, no one even listened to me. So, little pushback on your thing where you said the autonomous vehicles are going to be electric. Why do you think electric when, as we know, electricity is really manufactured energy versus gasoline or natural gas or something else? Why do you think it would be electric? Why do you think that's going to be the winner of autonomous vehicles?
Thanks for the question. Well, I think it just shows with the manufacturers and where they think this is going. If in 5-7 years they're shifting to have 15 to 20 new electric models and they're switching all of their manufacturing facilities over to that technology, I think it's just a natural intersection of where I think that's going to go. Again, there's a lot of hurdles that they have to overcome to marry both electric and autonomous into one car, because currently it's all pretty much gas-powered vehicles that are out there, but I just think that's the future of when they can get batteries to last longer, to provide more range, and then they have the whole environment, component of, hey, it's better for the atmosphere and whatnot. I just see where that's all trending, which I think would actually help us in the long run as we develop carbon capture and other similar technologies, that we'd be able to fit that with our baseload power generation.
Okay, we've got a question right here.
This is a question for Rich. How did the CO2 help, what kind of production increase did that give the tomato?
That's part of one of the studies that we're actually working with NDSU and EERC right now, is to study that evaluation of what actual percentage that'll push it up versus how many pounds you put towards the plant, how much they absorb, and how much is exhausted. A more realistic approach too, or I guess a more real-time approach, is we ask Casey Howlings, how much does it increase your production? His estimate was 25%. It pushes their production up 25%. There's a lot of other questions there, but just from a real-time approach, he injects the CO2 out of the facility in Utah into his greenhouse, and he sees a 25% boost. So,
Rich, just a quick follow-up. Are there,
Yes.
are there crops being looked at other than tomatoes? There's other year-round crops, cucumbers or strawberries or something like that, maybe?
That question came up this week. They asked him that question several times. Again, I'm not a greenhouse guy, but the greenhouse guy's answer was peppers are very common, cucumbers are very common, berries are becoming more common, but it's those lettuces are very common. Plants you would expect are common. So, yes.
Got a question from Mike right there.
Yeah, just to follow up to that, my question's related to the Howling greenhouse. Has some intermittency problems, right? Whereas if you compare it to one in North Dakota, you have a steady supply of heat integrated for electrical supply for growing lights, and you have a steady supply of CO2. Is that the case? They have more of an intermittency problem? So
the intermittency problem that they see in Utah is consistency of heat availability. They're tied to a power plant that doesn't run 100% of the time. It's become more of a peaking unit, and so their heat load quite often has to be supplemented by package boilers that they own and operate themselves. So we hope we would have much less issue with delivering them a consistent heat load. So
Now we're in trouble. We got Dr. Jones up next.
oh no.
I have one more for Jonathan, too. Do you see this really rolling out commercially for buses or, multiple passengers or individual travel, or what's the thinking right now that's going on?
Well, it seems like they're doing testing in a variety of areas. The bus that I showed from Minnesota, they're testing a bus for a reason. It's not just a car. And I think at least in a metro area like Minneapolis, St. Paul, they've got so much money invested in light rail and busing, and they got a lot of bicycle lanes too. But I think it's just something that from a mass transit point of view, this is a heck of a lot more economically efficient and less of an investment to do that technology than, say, a light rail train that goes 14, the current one they've got would go from Minneapolis to Eden Prairie, 14 miles, and the current estimates is about $2 billion, which is a lot of money where this could actually provide a better service, and it's not on a fixed line. They could adjust the route where they needed to go on an hour-by-hour basis, basically.
Okay, last question.
Rich, as you know, we passed the medical marijuana law, and so about every other day we get another story in the newspaper about somebody is deciding that they're going to show that entrepreneurial spirit and start a greenhouse that's going to grow medical marijuana. So let me just ask, is that on the table as well?
Thank you for that controversial question. It's been asked. But right now, what we're looking at is the partner that we have with the Howlings Group. They don't grow any any medical marijuana in any of their facilities. And they have facilities and locations where it's legal even recreationally. Their choice is to grow the staple crops that they see high value in, that they know. That's what we're pursuing right now, is with the steady, stable crops that there's much less risk involved in growing the tomatoes, the peppers, the cucumbers. That's the path we're going down right now, and that's the path we're going to stay with for now with Howlings. Their plan is sound, so we'll stay with that. So,
Rich, I can't believe you'd say marijuana is not a high-value crop. Where do you get that, man? I don't.
It's a high-risk crop.
Okay.
It's a high-risk crop.
All right, let's thank our panel. All right, thank you very much. All right, just a quick housekeeping announcement here. We've got the prize winners here. So pay attention here. The cooler is here. The other prizes we'll probably ship because we don't know who flew in and might not have room to carry it. The cooler winner is Gary Anderson with ESCO. Fred Dyke won the lawnmower. He's with Marcy Construction. Robin Govan with Falkirk gets the deer feeder. iBobber is Ryan Vallon and Ryan Grandelin. And the battery trimmer is Gerald Pfeiffer with Cateau. So those prizes will be delivered, or in Gary's case, you can pick up your cooler. That's at the end of the session. We're going to be back at 11 o'clock with our Lieutenant Governor Brent Sanford. So please enjoy a little networking time and be back at 11.